rational, in those situations. It's very emotional, and it's really hard to make good decisions, and it's hard to do stuff like that.
It really
So
is.
we can't just count on people making good decisions or rational decisions.
My mother died less than a year, well, it was less than a year after I got married. I was 24, I think, at the time. And she was actually, her back was hurting her. She set up all our flowers. She was amazing for the church, the wedding and everything. And so when we got finished, Martha and I were gonna head over to London to go with the church over there to help start the church there. But my mom went to the Mayo Clinic and she found out she had cancer. And so I flew up to the Mayo Clinic to be with her. My dad then flew up, and he just was in total denial. He didn't want to even talk about it. Make a long story short, basically what happened is about 9 months later, she died. And I had left to go to London because I thought she was getting better. So I flew back from London, couldn't afford Martha and I both to fly back. We sat down, and it was very, very uncomfortable with my father because my mother, she didn't quite die before I got back. I was able to talk to her before she died. So she told me all the things she wanted in her funeral and how she wanted all this to take care of. And, we talked a lot about God, and, my mom was baptized, so thank God for that. And when she died and I sat down, the family sat down to talk about the funeral, people would bring it up, and then I would say, no, this is what Mom wants. And man, I'm telling you what, the place just erupted in anger and frustration. Because why would Mom tell you and not tell me? Why would my wife tell you? Well, there was a lot of reasons for it. But there was no written document anywhere saying this is what I want done. And I'm telling you, it really helps to have something like that. It really, really does. Yes?
So after you go through this with your attorney, would you recommend taking the rough draft of what the attorney puts together and having a second opinion, or having someone else look at that as well, or are you able to trust that one person?
I think in most cases, I think the power of attorney is a little more difficult. Attorneys are like physicians. Think of attorneys like physicians. They all have their specialties. A lot of attorneys will a lot of attorneys who really shouldn't be doing this stuff do it. So you really need to get an attorney who knows estate planning, wills, trusts, all those type of things. Healthcare power of attorney is pretty simple, but the problem with when you get into a law office sometimes, if they don't know you, they won't know what questions to ask. So if it's very important for you, like you got your whole life setting on social media, and you got years and years and years of pictures, and you got baby pictures, and you got grandbaby pictures, and this is becoming more and more important now. And they create a power of attorney for you that doesn't even mention it. That could be the problem, right? So paying a little bit more money to get this done right is probably the way to go. This is not where you want to go and find the cheapest attorney you have. Yes.
Can you give us a roundabout estimate of how much it costs?
Bring that back up at the end, and I'll talk about that. Okay? All right. Let's go and talk about wills. This is my favorite will. I have nothing. I owe a great deal. The rest I give to them. That was the entirety of this guy's will. And it made him famous, a 15th century satirist. Nobody would have known who he is except for this line that he had in his will, right? And wills are, it's amazing what wills can do. Anybody heard of the Nobel Prize? Mm-hmm. Well, the guy, it's Alfred Nobel, and I think it's 1896 when he died, there was a couple of paragraphs in his will that basically outlined all the different Nobel Prizes that are awarded now, and that's how they came to be. They were in his will, right? This is how I want this done. He didn't write it very well. He didn't trust lawyers, so he tried to do it all himself. So it ended up costing several $1,000s to get everything untangled and straightened out, but it still worked in the end. There's a lot of famous people who die without wills. Abraham Lincoln died without a will. Can you imagine that? If there's ever a guy that should have had a will, that's him. Martin Luther King had no will. Jimi Hendrix, Pablo Picasso, Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes died in, I think, 76, somewhere along that line. Howard Hughes died. He was a recluse. He was an angry, bitter, 92-pound man, I think, when he died. He was a multi-billionaire. He had, I don't know if you've seen some of the movies. What was the guys that
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Aviator?
DiCaprio, right.
Aviator.
Yeah, Howard Hughes movie. Howard Hughes, when he died, 40 wills popped up from all over the place. And the most famous one was called the Mormon will, where it said that I think he said that he left something like 20% of his fortune to a guy who worked at a gas station, you know. And the reason why he left this money to this guy who worked at a gas station, and part of the rest was gonna go to the Mormon church, is because this guy pulled over and picked up an old man walking along the side of the road one day, and it ended up being Howard Hughes. And Howard Hughes was hitchhiking, because he was kind of a weirdo. And this guy ended up picking him up and taking him and taking care of him, buying him some food. And so he ended up leaving him a bunch of money in his will, supposedly. Well, the will wasn't accepted, so it ended up there was no will for Howard Hughes. That was in '76, so how many years is that? 40 years, 41 years now? The estate has still not been settled. 40 years later, they're still fighting over this estate. So the only people that have gotten anything out of this were the attorneys so far, right? Bob Marley, Kurt Cobain, Tupac Shakur, Steve McNair, Amy Winehouse, and most recently Prince did not have a will either. So you got a lot of people who don't think, you don't have a will, well, you're in good company. There's a lot of people that don't. All right, a lot of people just don't get it done because it's just not one of those things that keep in the forefront of it.
We're in good company, Kurt.
What do wills cover? Have you ever heard of the process of probate, all right? Probate is very important, and it's basically a legal mechanism that civilized societies have created, and this came out of English law, for the transfer of property at death. The transfer, your ability to decide what happens to your property at death is not a natural right. It is a right that's created by the law. All right? So you think in a war zone, somebody dies, there's no law there, right? Whoever, people just come in and just grab what they want, and they take off, and they go somewhere else with it. So if you think about the chaos that would result if the law did not allow anybody free access to your property as soon as you died, right? If there wasn't a structured process for it. And basically what the English law gives you is the freedom, it's called freedom of testation, which simply means it's the right for us to decide who gets our property at our death. That's what it is. Your probate estate simply means the property that you hold in your name only, over which you alone have control. So this is important to understand. So the probate process deals with property in your name only, over which you have control. It does not include jointly held property, or it does not include things disposed of through a beneficiary designation. So for instance, life insurance with a beneficiary designation, if you have a beneficiary designation, will not be part of your probate estate. If you think about the probate estate, think about this. The probate estate is what my will controls. So when I write something in my will about what I want done, the only thing that will is going to control is what goes into my probate estate. If something doesn't go into my probate estate, my will have no effect over that property. So, and we'll get to a couple examples here in a second. So this is gonna be a little bit, weird and hard to grasp some of this stuff, but basically it's not as hard as it seems. So the probate process is property over which your will governs. If you don't have a will, the state of Illinois has a will for you, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So
Nice.
the steps in the probate process are this. Somebody dies, the first thing is you want to find if they have a will. You want to find if the will is current and it's not one that's an old will. And then you start the probate estate by going to the court, and you file the will in the court, right? So that starts the probate process. Now wills and courts are public, open to the public, so anybody can see your will once it gets to the court process. Notice to heirs and interested parties. So the next thing that happens is anybody who's an heir in the will, anybody who's an interested party in the will, there has to be some kind of notice goes out. Sometimes there's notice that goes out in the newspapers. Sometimes there's letters that go out to them. It depends on the state, because every state is different. Then you have the appointment of the executor and the administrator. The executor is who you name in your will to basically carry out your wishes in that will. So, you know, most of the time it's your spouse, but it can really be anybody, it doesn't have to be. The next thing that happens is the executor oversees the filing of an inventory for the estate. So you gotta figure out what the estate's made of. You know, what are the assets? What are the bank accounts? You know, is there cash? Is there property? All those type of things. Then you pay claims against the estate. So maybe, you know, before I died, I owed somebody $10,000. They come up, you know, they see notice in the newspaper, oh my gosh, Larry's died, he owes me 10 grand. So he goes in, you know, they produce to the executor then the loan document that I signed with them, and that's a claim against the estate. And then they're gonna figure out, well, is this a legitimate claim or is it not? If it is, they'll pay it. If it's not, then they won't. They pay the debts, taxes, fees, expenses. For people who are wealthy, meaning in the state of Illinois, you have to have more than $4 million in the probate estate. Or in the federal government, it's about $5.6 million. You have to pay an estate tax. If you don't have that much money, you don't have to worry about it. Then, one of the last things that happens is you give the beneficiaries the property that the will says. So that can usually take 8-9 months at the very least. So it takes a long time. For a complicated estate, it can take 2 to 3 years. Yes?
How does it work with, like, so let's say when you die, hopefully this isn't the case, but you're more in debt than you are in the surplus. How does that affect your family / power of attorney? Like, do they have to take on some of that debt, or how does that work?
Normally you don't, no. If you're married, you might, your spouse might. It just depends on how the property is held, and depends on, you know, that's why banks have people, you know, if your bank's loaning money to somebody, they try to get as many people to sign on that loan as possible, right? Because they want to have a way to get their money back. Sometimes it really helps with a bank if they know that you have an insurance policy that can pay that if you're dead. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to do that, but normally your heirs do not have to pick up your debts after it's over.
Is that where, so like if you do have some things that are worth like a significant amount of money, will that money from those items go towards the debt first before it comes to your family and to other people?
Yeah, it will, and there's some ways, if like somebody gave away a lot of money right before they died and basically made themselves insolvent right before death, then the courts will go back and make them give that money back so they can settle the estate. Yeah, that happens all the time, actually, very common.
So don't have debt.
Yeah. Or let's say, you know, well, there's a lot of different things this takes care of, but the last thing is to close the estate. So that's the probate process. So let's just take a look at this. In Illinois, if this wasn't complicated enough, it's going to get a little more complicated. So the process of having to actually go to court, file your will, you know, have the judge oversee the process, all this other kind of stuff. If you've got less than $100,000 in your probate estate, then you don't have to go through that probate process. There's a thing called a small estate affidavit. And that small estate affidavit gets filed, then you're able to go to like the bank, for instance, and say, hey, I'm the executor on this estate. This is my mom's account. Here's her death certificate. She died. I want to, you know, close this bank account out and create another bank account in the name of her estate. And so you'd be able to do that. You don't have to spend all the extra money going through the court to do it. So less than $100,000, you can do that. So what a lot of people do, even people with millions of dollars, they will try to make sure that their probate estate is less than $100,000 so they can avoid probate altogether. And you can't do that. A lot of times it doesn't work that way, but you can do it. One of the problems that you have is sometimes people don't have life insurance designations that are proper. It sometimes even says life insurance beneficiary is my estate. Well, if you had a couple $100,000 life insurance contract and you died and then it goes into your estate, well, you've automatically got more than $100,000 and it's going to have to go through the probate process. Okay? Creating a will. All right, so this is another one that's pretty important. Most of the states are pretty uniform in what they require here They're not 100% uniform. But the will in almost every case must be in writing.